send in your comments and tell me what you think. So we think about the Charles Darwin fella. I call him the man that forsook God. Have you ever met God? You know there is a God, and it's not you, it's not me. He is the one who created every human being. Every human being is first a spirit that rules a soul, that rules a body. Have you ever met God? Did you know that God still has a son? His name is Yeshua HaMashiach, because when he walked the earth, and he did live here just like we do, that was his Hebrew name, Yeshua HaMashiach. In English, we call him Jesus, called the Christ. He is God. He's the Messiah. Have you ever heard of anything such as that? This Charles Darwin fella apparently lost his mind in his life over his little girl because he didn't believe in God. See, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. How much of you, the only thing I ever heard about Charles Darwin is when I was in school was basically nothing. I don't know anything about him. I do think, however, that a lot of the system is ran under that particular system. It's why they had so many weird horror movies with experiments on women, because he lost his little girl, she's about 11, from a very unusual type of bone cancer. They described it as rare bone marrow cancer. And because he, being the great scientist that he is, he couldn't save her, so he blamed God. And all I've ever heard about Charles Darwin is that he went to a place called the Galapagos Islands to find a physical representation of his so-called theory of evolution, which is impossible to find. I heard that, but then I heard this later story that he went to that island to commit suicide because he lost his little girl to that cancer. I call him the man that forsook God. Hey, let me ask you, do you have a problem that seems unconquerable? Don't blame God. Do you have a physical ailment that you say that the doctors can't find a cure? Don't blame God. Has life, say, thrown you a curve or kicked you to the curb? Don't blame God. God is not to blame for any problem I have. He's not to blame for any problem you have. He's totally just. He's totally fair. Have you ever met God? Don't wind up like this Charles Darwin. Don't put a gun in your mouth. Why don't you just talk to God? You don't have to believe in him. Talk to him. He doesn't panic because people don't believe in him. If you have a problem that you think is absolutely insurmountable, can't find your way around it, you need to talk to God. You can't find it within yourself. God is not in me. There is one who identifies himself as a spirit. God is a spirit, for God is a spirit, and if you're going to worship him, if I'm going to worship him, and we must worship him, he's owed that, then we must worship him in spirit and in truth. Hey, God specializes in things that are impossible. YouTube viewer, who out there knows about Charles Darwin? Who is Charles Darwin? I've been hearing his name pop up recently. If you know who Charles Darwin is, give me a shout. I saw something on a couple of videos earlier this evening, and it reminded me of something that I heard about Charles Darwin, and that is that Charles Darwin, is that right? Was a scientist, is that right? Charles Darwin was supposed to be some kind of a scientist, and he had a tiny 10-year-old girl, 10-year-old, 11-year-old girl, and she had an unusual type of bone marrow cancer. Apparently, he was somewhat of a scientist, and he couldn't find a cure for his daughter. And his daughter passed, of course. And so, like a lot of people, when they try to use God as an ace in the hole or as a last-ditch effort, I have to call on God, whatever. Well, he tried that. He thought that God should heal his child, even though he had no relationship with God. And you like that? You think God ought to do something for you, and you ain't got no relationship with him. You don't know anything about him, but you think God should solve all your problems? He thought that, and so when God, every soul does belong to God. You ever met God? Every soul belongs to God. Well, apparently, his little girl, God thought she was too good for this world, certainly too good for him, and God called her home. And he got upset because God called his little girl home. So on this particular narrative I heard that he went to the place called the Isle of Galapagos and put a gun in his mouth and committed suicide. Now, I've also heard that he went to the Isle of Galapagos to supposedly discover something to get a physical representation of evolution, which is absolutely impossible, because there is no, if you go by what they call their basic theory of evolution, which is really just religion, because there's no scientific evidence to back up a theory. When people are propagating a theory and trying to make it science, but there's no scientific evidence of that theory or to prove that theory, then it becomes a religion. See, that's why Jesus Christ is not a religion, because he is divine. He's the Son of the living God. Well, do we have any examples of who he is? Absolutely. You would be one example. I would be another, because he created all human beings. So I don't know who this Charles Darwin fellow is, but I can tell you one thing. He put a gun in his mouth, and that doesn't sound like a very wise man to me. When your problems seem insurmountable, you need to talk to the only one who can solve your problem. He's bigger than your problem. He sits above the heavens. And if you don't believe in him, now maybe you one of the redeemed. You could be one of the redeemed and don't even know it. But when your problems seem insurmountable, the only one that can help you is God. Have you ever met God? This fella sure said,